with just scapegoating social media? Is that the only cause for this mental health crisis in young people and also in adults as well? Are there other causes? One question mentions war and poverty. What are the main causes of mental health crisis? Is it just social media? Do you want to give us?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think it's right. I don't think it is just social media. There are lots of other stresses and sources of trauma in people's lives besides social media. And in fact, rates of mental health problems have always moved up and down. I mean, this does seem to be different. The slide upward is quite marked, and it's carrying on at the moment. So this does seem to be something different. But they've always gone up and down, and it's often hard to pin, effect on the cause. But we do need to bear in mind those other things. And I mentioned poverty, and I mentioned family stability, and then there are the wider ecological context, particularly for young people who worry about ecological issues, and particularly if they haven't developed a resilience about the reality. The world is a hard place, and if they haven't developed that resilience, they're going to be more worried about those issues. And if their concerns have been echo-chambered by confirmation bias, which has pushed them to the extremes, they may be getting really over-concerned and misunderstanding data. So absolutely, there are these other issues in play. But the problem is, I think social media amplifies and exaggerates those issues. And it's the interaction of the two that just leads us to focus on the social media in the first instance. But you're absolutely right. Fix social media, mental health will go away. Mental health, of course not. It's always been, always will be with us. But if we're trying to explain a sudden rise, then I think social media is one of the key issues at the moment.
Yeah, I would agree on that. And I think, the issues, there are some huge issues that we're all, and young people particularly, grappling with, a war in Europe, Israel, Gaza, climate change, people very anxious about whether they're going to get a job or not, racial inequality, social inequality, so many things. And social media brings those to people's attention with news flashes now every few minutes. It used to be that you just turned on the 10 o'clock news or whatever, and that's when you saw what was happening. So I think we're much more aware now of those big issues, and so therefore they're also more impactful. So it's complex.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. And you're right, it is complex, but I think, Glynn, we were speaking just behind there about how it's particularly complex when there's a difference between boys and girls. We're seeing these social media applications having different impacts on both genders, but also them struggling with different things. Would you guys mind talking a bit more about why there's a difference when it comes to gender and what that difference might actually look like in reality?
Yeah, this is a big area, but there are doubtless general differences between the ways boys behave and girls behave. They're general average differences. And so that doesn't mean that some girls aren't behaving like the way some boys do, and there aren't some boys who are very interested in things that are cool. So there's big overlap there, but on average there are differences. And you did see differences in the slope of graphs, differences in the starting points between the two. And in general terms, in the early days, boys, on average, lots of exceptions, but on average, they tended to gravitate toward problems of gaming and pornography. Those were the two bubble-up issues. There were others as well, but those seem to hook the cognitive style that is more common in boys, particularly. I mean, as it's turned out, as more information has become available, carefully, policed or carefully disciplined gaming, actually the risks are very low and can be of enormous benefits to kids as well. So gaming per se isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's the way it's managed and the amount of time it consumes that's the important thing. Traditionally, overall girls are particularly vulnerable to apps that make them anxious about appearance. Now there's movement going on here. A lot of boys now are worried about their appearance as well. And but traditionally, social media have pushed things, visual cues related to how I look to girls more than the boys. So those differences are coming through in the rates of upturn at the moment. And I think we'll have to wait and see how this develops further. If I have boys and girls, I've become equally concerned about them both at the moment.
Yeah, it's true, because, many girls will be looking at porn, and many boys very concerned that they're buff enough, that, addicted to going to the gym, all those kind of things. So whilst that's absolutely right, and Jonathan Haidt's book just makes that distinction between the front-facing camera and Instagram for girls and gaming and porn for boys, it is across the board.
To what extent, we've had a couple of questions here, is screen time still inevitable, even if we're seeing that it has such detrimental impacts? Schools, since the pandemic, have had to switch to online resources or provide cover for children that are ill on Zoom. How can we still have healthy boundaries with screens, despite the fact that we know it has such detrimental impact?
Yeah, I think with time it's useful to be a bit more granular when we're looking at time on screens, because, children will be on screens a lot during the school day. Many schools will have given children iPads, they have to do homework on them, etc. So maybe rather than just looking at time per se, looking at the purpose of it. So are they online on a screen having a Zoom call with a grandparent? Are they playing a game? Are they connecting with friends? Are they doing chemistry homework? Whatever. What's the purpose of it? Is it recreation? Is it education? And just sort of looking at it from that lens rather than just blanket time on screens. That can be helpful, I think.
I think especially the issue is intentionality. If you go to your phone intending to use it for something, that seems to be much less harmful than scrolling. Scrolling is really the enemy here, because when we scroll, and there is something really pleasing about scrolling. A, it shows you the stuff you like. B, it gives you little dopamine hits. C, it makes you anxious, so you need to keep scrolling, and on it goes. And scrolling does seem to be, the studies that have tried to separate out the type of use of social media does seem to highlight, it's not completely conclusive, but does point toward passive use being far more harmful than intentional use. So again, it's about helping our kids to be smart, to prepare to use social media as they would prepare to get their first Maserati, whatever you're going to buy them. You prepare them for it, and you work with them and let them see the way you yourself are learning to combat these algorithms that want to take control of our minds.
And I also think it's not necessarily one size fits all. It's about knowing our personality, and for some people, they'll be able to manage a different amount of time on screen than others. So it's knowing ourselves, I think.
That's really helpful, thank you. We have a couple of questions on whether social media is just being used to numb ourselves from the real world. Do you think that's what you found in your research and in family case studies? How can we help people to feel more comfortable being in the real world, especially if that seems like quite a big jump for those that have anxiety, real struggle in conversation? How do we bridge that gap?
We've just talked about gaming, and gaming isn't all bad. As Glynn said, it's a new medium for storytelling, for adventure. There's lots of positives, but also it is an escape to a different reality, a different adventure. And I will often say to parents who are concerned about the number of hours that their children are gaming, maybe just think about, is that a symptom of something else going on in their lives? Are they trying to escape from something and the game is just the symptom of that? That's not the issue. So I think that's one thing worth considering.
Yeah, I remember being alongside a young guy who, I think he was mid-20s at the time, heavily traumatized by earlier life experiences. I mean, awful story. And a lot of work still going on there. But he would have sudden acute periods of terrible panic as this trauma resurfaced. And he would use gaming as a kind of rabbit hole. And he could disappear for 36 hours gaming because it was an escape from the reality. But of course, he's only going to get well. He's only going to work through this over time by coming to terms with the reality of the external world and the reality of his inner world. And so, it's about social media being a reality blocker for us. That's the problem. And the more we can do to push our kids back into reality and ourselves, I think the better.
That's really helpful. And that's actually a helpful segue into some of the questions we've got coming on here towards if we want to encourage people to be in the real world. One of the things you mentioned is being a bit risky in the way that we involve ourselves in day-to-day activities, whether that's going on a walk or going to school on our own. But I'm sure many are concerned about whether that's actually possible in cities like London with crime rates as high as they are. Is it possible to be risky? How do we do that in a way that's safe? What would you say towards that?
I agree with Jonathan Haidt that we have definitely underprotected our children on the wild west of the online world, and that we are overprotecting them in the real world. But it is a different issue in London than it would be in leafy Somerset. But there are still dangers. I think we know our children best, and we know what the next step for them would be to have the next bit of independence. I often talk about something called parenting with elastic. So the idea is that as parents, we want to keep our children safe. And so we keep them on this tight bit of string close to us so they don't come to any harm. But then they seek their independence, which is what they're meant to do. And that string then goes taut and it will snap. But if we use elastic, then we gradually allow them choices and little bits of responsibility as they get older. And it makes that task to independence so much easier, not just for them, but for us as well, because it is hard allowing them to do new things. But if we can do it step by step, appropriate for their age, stage, and maturity, then we'll be doing them a really good service and helping them grow in resilience, and means we're there to pick up the pieces when things do go wrong.
Katharine, if you don't mind, can I push you slightly on that? What would those steps potentially look like?
So let's think about this is a very obvious one, and I don't live in London, so I don't know what the translation would be, but for our children when they went to secondary school, so junior school, we lived very near, but generally we would take them to school. Secondary school, right, they're going to go on the bus on their own. But day one, didn't put them on a bus. We said, right, okay, day one, we'll go on the bus with you. Day two, we'll take you to the bus stop, and then you get on the bus and you do that. And day three, then you go by yourself. So those things, putting the appropriate safeguards in place where necessary, but allowing them that little bit of adventure.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
And I just add in there, I obviously, as you say, no one size fits all, but I would want to say to we parents and grandparents, use your imagination. This takes a bit of work. But first of all, just check what the levels of risk really are, because we've developed this fancy that things are incredibly dangerous now, and it was all a paradise back in the 50s. I mean, I used to put my hands together, very good boy, so I could get out quick to meet a friend to pile stones up, and these were half bricks that we would hurl at Michael Sweet's gang, which I remember to this day, and they would hurl things at us. I mean, it was incredibly dangerous. But hey, I got through, And the 50s were not I think so anyway. Some may say that accounts for a few. But the 50s were not this kind of halcyon paradise where everyone was safe. Look at the data. The chances of being abducted now have not grown. In fact, they may have fallen slightly. It's an incredibly rare event. And kids are smart, and they can begin to navigate the London Tube sooner than you think. But you've got to set it up carefully as you go along.
And talk to them about what you do if something goes wrong, so they know. They know how to get back home or whatever it is.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Boo. We've had a couple of questions in about those that are in slightly different contexts to being parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles. We have one in particular who says that he or she are an adult and their parents who are in their 60s are actually worse than they are on social media.
Yeah.
So how can we talk to those kind of family responsibilities? How can we best respect those that are older than us but might be struggling a bit more than we are?
Well, I would begin the conversation, but respectfully. I think if it's happening in our presence, so if we're trying to have a cup of coffee and they keep picking the phone up, could actually say, do you know, would it be possible to just put that away and let's have the conversation with the people face to face rather than all these other people who are now coming in via the phone? I think it needs to be respectful and needs to be appropriate, but it's really worth having those conversations. And sometimes older people, my mother is 90 and she has a mobile phone that she's actually pretty good on, but she doesn't really get that it's a bit rude to answer it the moment it goes if you're having a conversation with someone. And you know, she's 90, I'm just going to let her do that. So it's all according to the relationship, isn't it? And what relationship you have. But helping each other, we need each other in this. It's too hard to do it on our own.
That's really helpful.
And I think I encourage our kids to challenge us. Someone was telling me, you know, his kid keeps challenging him. You know, what's good for me, it ought to be good for you. And we should encourage and welcome that. And just begin to spot all the ways in which these things have led us to behave inappropriately. I mean, for example, I haven't got my phone out during this conversation, but quite possibly, if we were out for dinner, you could put your phone out there. That is saying, with the notifications on, that whoever rings this thing right now is more important than this conversation with you or these conversations here. Now, I haven't got it out here, but there are lots of situations where we get out our phone and the message we're giving is that this is all important and it controls our life, and that lots of ways we could begin now to take back control, to coin a phrase.
And so often with that, I find it's that we're talking about something. Well, that's interesting. Let's look it up.
Yeah.
So we look it up, and then it takes us on to the next thing and the next thing.
And that can be quite a good, it can stimulate a conversation. You look something up. The problem is then you think, I'll just check my email and the BBC website and the pound-dollar
the weather
ratio while I'm at it, and that's what they do for you. Yeah.
So put it away.
Okay.
To bring this into a slight gear shift, we mentioned previously in the discussion in your talk, Glynn, about being made in the image of God. I'm aware that some people here won't know what that means. Would you guys mind tweezing that out a bit? Why is that so important?
Yeah. Well, I said it, so I was better try and answer that. Yes, I'm sorry, I kind of slipped that in and forgot that it's not an easy term, but it's one of the great phrases that's been in the Christian story right for the past 2,000 years. And it's this extraordinary idea that we have an animal nature, of course, but there's something about us that transfigures that, and that is something like God himself. And so we seem to be wired for, disposed toward love and to search for meaning and to want to make a difference in the world and be creative. And all of those things are hallmarks of the character of God, who is love, who is creative and wants to make a difference. And so that there's that sense of resonance. Actually, the phrase first appears in the image of God in the very first chapter of the Bible. which is an ancient document, remember. And the term image of God wasn't confined to the Hebrews. In fact, the Egyptians called the Pharaoh the image of God. But in that society, it was only the big guy who got the phrase, and he was God's representative on earth, you see. And what these ancient people did in the ancient scriptures, the Bible as we know it, is they took that term and they said, no. Made in the image of God doesn't apply just to the big guy. It applies to every ordinary man and woman that is born, because they are unique, created by God and loved by him. Just think about it. Thousands of years ago, people said that a woman is made in the image of God in the same way as a man. Every little baby born, disabled child in the image of God, precious, valuable. It is one of the most stunning gifts to the world that the Christian story brought. And that's why I kind of wove that in, because when you begin to get that, you say, do we treat the image of God like rats to be checking their phones and somehow controlled by these people in California or Beijing? No, we're called something larger than that.
And for those that collected a booklet on their way in, I believe if you've got further questions on what Glynn's just mentioned about that, there's a course called Christianity Explored that you can come to right here in this building, where you can ask a bit more about why that should shape our identity or how that could shape our day-to-day. Is that right?
Yeah, and I suppose the shorter answer to the question you just asked about the image of God would be, that's one of those great questions that this course, Christianity Explored, is designed to explore. And it's for people with questions. It's not people with answers, it's with questions, who want to come along and look at the Christian story and say, does this add up for me? Is this ultimately true? And in the same way that we look at the social media data, we weigh up the facts, you can do the same. And I think on the bookstall there's this book, Confronting Christianity, which is a terrific read, Rebecca McLaughlin, looking at some of the hard questions about suffering and why does God allow us, and all those big questions. And I think Christianity Explored is a great starting point, introduction, as a course for someone wanting to come along and say, I'm just looking, but I want to find out more, Well,
thank you. And as Glynn said, both the books Confronting Christianity and Confronting Jesus can be found on the bookstall after this event if you want to read more. But I believe there's also another book on the bookstall. Would you mind talking a bit about that, Katharine? Left to Their Own Devices?
Oh, yeah. My one, Left to Their Own Devices, Confident Parenting in a World of Screens. So, that's available as well. It's obviously got a lot more in than we've been able to talk about this evening. It's really practical, got some funny cartoons, lots of action points that people can do in groups, family units, whatever. Love to sign one of those for people if they want to, just in that area after. And I think you'll be there as well, won't you?
I don't know why, but I will. But everyone will be getting a little advert about this in their social media feed tonight, so keep an eye out for that.
That's right. So if you'd like your book, or if you have a question that you'd like to ask these two, they will be on the bookstall afterwards. Before we wrap up, are there any final tips that you guys would like to give these lovely audience members before they go? Any final tidbits they should take away? What's one thing they should remember?
Do you know, what's helped me a lot is to reimagine my phone, not as my friend, but as a Jekyll and Hyde. This is a Jekyll and Hyde. Jekyll, I hope I got this the right way around. He's my friend, he's a good guy, but he turns into Hyde, if I've got that the right way around, but you get the meaning. He can become Hyde. He wants to hurt me. He's going to harm me by harvesting my attention with total disregard for my well-being. So let's reshape our imagination and think about these things differently.
It's really good. And maybe building on that then, I would say, we'll all be in different situations. So some will be parents here, grandparents, maybe students, maybe sharing a flat with friends, whatever. But I would say not going down the sort of inevitable, this is terrible, route of doom and gloom, but thinking there's an amazing gift in technology. We just need to make good choices, not make our world smaller, but learn wisdom, God-given wisdom, how to make good choices in a world where any choice is possible. And we have everything to play for in that.
That's great. Guys, thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause?